How many of you work with, go to school with, have a friend that just doesn't like to do their job? I mean, little things like pick up trash or, you know, boys flush the toilet. They just usually spend so much time trying to justify their actions rather than just do the job. Well, in the summer of 1997, I was a new canine officer in my city, and I was sent to be a backup on a loud party. So I was always a backup officer. I was never an initial officer when it come to reports. In my city, they allowed the canines to kind of stay free to do things, so we never really had to do any reports, so we didn't have to do any accident reports. Of course, we always rendered first aid if we got there and the accident was bad, but we never had to do those type of reports, the initial report that people would take. So I get there and, we shut the party down, if I remember right, and as I'm leaving, someone approaches me and says, "Hey, I gotta do a report. Someone stole something of mine." And I looked at him and, I'm trying to justify it in my own mind. I'm new, so, but I'm a canine guy now. I really don't have to take this. Trying to justify it, and I thought, if I spend the whole 15 minutes of telling him why I don't have to do it, it'd just be quicker just to take it and get it over with. And instead of calling someone else over, I just went ahead and did it. My gut told me I probably should. So I started taking a report, and the man tells me about a handgun that had been stolen. And so now I'm really interested, and he had the make, model, serial number, everything about the handgun, and he said he knows who did it. And he gave me the name, and it was kind of a frequent flyer of ours. He was always in trouble, and low-level type crimes, but he was always in trouble. So I knew who it was. So I went ahead and took the report. I went looking for him, if I remember right, couldn't find him. As things go, you get called to other calls, and you go other places, and I ended up turning the report in, let the investigators do their job. Well, about a week later, we get a call about a liquor store that was not closed. They were supposed to be closed at 3 a.m., but it was about 3:30, and someone tried to drive up and get the last bit of their liquor for the night, and the store was wide open, nobody inside, but it wasn't closed. So they called the police. We went out there and we called the alarm company. Alarm hadn't been set. We knew something was wrong, so we got in contact with the liquor store owner, and he came in, and sure enough, the drawer was empty. He gave us who was supposed to be working, description of the car, and said this isn't like him. I know it wasn't him. It had to be someone else. So the investigators started investigating that part, and we're out looking for the car. Well, on the other side of town, there's a park, and this park is kind of known for a little bit of bad stuff going on, and the parks in our town was closed at 11, but we'd always catch people in there doing different things. So this park is about 3 city square blocks, and on the west side of it was a train track, and on the other side of the train track was a set of woods, and on the south side was a river, and there was a road that ran beside the river. So about 2 hours later, 2 officers found the truck and ran the plate. It came back to the liquor store employee. So immediately we know that something probably happened just because of the park it was in. And the first canine to get there runs a track from the driver's side, and it kind of goes back toward the back of the truck and then down to the river. Well, I get there and I run one from the passenger side. It comes around the truck in the back, kind of goes at an angle, and ends up in the same spot. So we know something bad happened. Couldn't find a track leading out of it, so we're kind of concentrating on the river at that point. So people go downstream to see if they can find anything downstream. And anybody who knows me or heard me speak before, one of my fears is heights. Scared to death of height. But when adrenaline kicks in, you do stupid things and things that you normally wouldn't do because you're scared to do. Well, I go up on the trestle and I cross the trestle because I can't wade through the water because it's too deep. So I go on the other side, see if I can find anything on the other side of the river. I don't find anything. Again, conquer my fear. I go back up across the trestle, come back across the trestle. Now I'm going to search the open area. And we learned from the Oklahoma City bombings, it wasn't the dogs that were bred and trained for search and rescue type operations that found the most people, whether dead or alive. It was actually the patrol dogs, the dogs that knew what stress was and could handle that stress. Those type of dogs would normally shut down in that kind of carnage, where the patrol dogs, because it's a walk in the park, it's an everyday job for them. So they would search, and we knew that if we were searching for a victim, the dog would find them without the bite. So I do a wide sweeping open area of this park, and in the center of the park's a ballpark. So I searched the two dugouts, nothing. Well, I get up to the railroad tracks and I go, okay, there's a wooded area. I'll start in the wooded area. And the other canine had beat me. I got about 10 steps, and he yells, "We found him." He was bound, gagged. We rendered first aid, but it was too late. I get a call about a week later. They had a suspect, named a suspect. Of course, we don't know because they're trying to find him without too much publicity on it. That was a few days later, maybe not a week. Get a call from my lieutenant, and he said, "Hey, this is the suspect. I want to thank you for doing that report that night, because the guy that stole the gun is the guy that committed the murder. And the gun was used to not shoot, just beat the guy. And we found the DNA, without getting too specific, on the gun." So I'm just thankful. He ended up, the investigator, probably one of the best I've ever been around, pieced together this murder, and he got a conviction on the guy without even a trial. The guy he pled guilty to murder, robbery, criminal confinement, and kidnapping. Got 155 years in prison. Not patting myself on the back by any stretch. I'm just thankful that I did my job and took a report that really didn't have to do. But you never know on the backside what those little things are going to come to. The Christian living class I have today is not all heroes wear capes. Hayden Marsh, where are you at? You're an exception. And we all know the story of Esther. And briefly, here it is. I could just stand up here and read the whole book of Esther and tell you the story, but I've kind of summarized it. Tried to make sure it was in the proper order, because it does matter. But Esther was a captive Jewish girl living in Persia, raised by her cousin Mordecai, who wanted her not to let anybody know that she was a Jew. When King Xerxes, I guess he's known as too, not that Ahasuerus was too hard to pronounce, he had a queen. Her name was Vashti, and they both had a feast at one time, and he wanted to call her over to show her off because she was a beautiful woman, and she refused. Well, enraged, he got with his little council and said, "Hey, what do you think?" They said, "Man, if you let her get away with it, all the women are going to want to get away with it. So we can't have this in our kingdom." So he was kind of a ruthless leader. So he ousted the queen as his wife, and searched for all eligible women that were brought to him. Esther was one of those eligible women who was brought to him. And after a year preparing, so guys, when women take like an hour to get ready, look at this story. It took her a year to get ready. After a year preparing, he ultimately chose Queen Esther as his wife. Then one day Mordecai overhears a plot to kill the king, and he sent word through Esther to tell the king. That saved the king's life. The event was recorded in his chronicles. Let's go to Esther 2, starting in verse 21. Esther 2, 21 through 23. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on the gallows. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Mordecai just did the right thing because it was just the right thing to do. You know, we can argue that he probably had some skin in the game with Esther being the queen, but he just did what was right. And I hope we'd all do that if we hear something like that would ever happen. You know, Mordecai saved the king from an assassination attempt. And, you know, from throughout history, from that time till now, kingdoms and countries enter some kind of conflict due to assassinations. Sometimes it'll help end conflicts, sometimes it'll start conflicts. But anyhow, there are conflicts. World War I, for instance, was caused by an assassination attempt and an assassination of those same people. This occurs when factions try to gain power and try to insert themselves into authority positions within the kingdoms or countries. And sometimes the country will not survive. Mark 3:25 says, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." That's what Jesus said. You know, Satan is a master of confusion and will stir the pot to cause more division, but God didn't allow it to happen in this time. But through trials, when it seemed all would be for naught, he made a way. You know, there used to be a song that I would sing in church a while back, and it said, it was written by Don Moen, "God will make a way when there seems to be no way. He works in ways we cannot see. He will make a way for me. He will be my guide, hold me closely to his side. With love and strength for each new day, he will make a way." You know, my job right now is a canine supervisor of 4 explosive detection canine teams with the Transportation Security Administration, also known as TSA. It's the people that search you when you go into the checkpoints. I'm at Indianapolis Airport, and TSA is a part of the Department of Homeland Security. After 9/11, we adopted a slogan from the New York Metro Transit Authority that if you see something, say something. And I really can't tell you how many times in the past few years, oh boy. So I gotta pause here real quick because this is my first time using a computer to do my sermonette, whatever you want to call this. And my screen just went whoo all the way down, so I gotta back up. So I'm sorry if there's a little bit of a pause, but there we go. Can't tell you how many times I've been training in the airport environment, whether at Indianapolis or other locations. I used to travel all over the country, and we'd have bags laying out for our canines to come and search. And people want to walk up and say, "Those bags right there are unattended." And I'll kind of look at the dog, and I really want to be sarcastic and go, "Really, I'll get somebody to come look into it." I want to be just a smart aleck, but I don't, because, they're just doing what we ask them to do. That if you see something, you got to say something. And I would encourage each one of you to do the same. Just 1 year ago in Richmond, Virginia, 2 suspects were arrested when a tip came in from the police. The caller stated he overheard a conversation between these 2 guys who were planning to conduct a mass shooting on a 4th of July celebration at an amphitheater that held 2,400 people. The subsequent raid on the house, they found 240 rounds of ammunition, 2 assault rifles, and 1 handgun. Who knows how many lives were saved by that person, who's unknown to us because he is the person who reported it. But I bet you he didn't wear a cape. He just did the right thing because it was the right thing to do. All he knew is he heard someone talking about some suspicious activity, and he let the police do their jobs. You'll always have the courage to do the right thing. Courage isn't really being afraid. It's not. Courage is standing up to your fear. And be like Mordecai. He was a hero, Don't think he wore a cape either. Go to Esther 3, starting in verse 1. Esther 3, verse 1. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him to and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman. For so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" Now it happened when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman, to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with wrath. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. After this plot, the king promoted Haman to be his right-hand man. Haman was kind of full of himself and began to hate Esther's cousin Mordecai because Mordecai would not bow to him or pay homage to him, since he only served God. We have a bunch of songs that we sing. We heard them a couple of them last night. Toby Keith has one, and Lee Greenwood had one that we really adopted back in the 80s, sing with Bruce Springsteen about America. But none will top the Star Spangled Banner. There was once a lawyer. His name was Francis Scott Key. And he penned a poem that became a song that I'm sure you're aware of. And we listened to it last night. You have seen it in history books and sang it at every major and minor sporting event in this country. And there we go again. It's called the National Anthem, and it's our song as an American. Most of us memorize it as a child, but do we really know what it means? Well, I'm going to tell you a story. The story I'm going to tell you is a story I heard, the way I heard it a few years back. The back and forth between the characters, I find some history that conversation did take place, and some kind of paraphrase it, so I'm going to paraphrase it as well. Francis Scott Key was a lawyer in Baltimore, and the colonies were engaged in a vicious conflict with Great Britain. Because of the conflict, they had accumulated prisoners on both sides. America had prisoners, and the Brits had prisoners. An American government initiated a move, and they had gone to the British government and asked for a negotiation for the release of these prisoners. They said they wanted to send a man to negotiate this with them, as they had held prisoners in ships about 1,000 yards off the shore. They said they had wanted to send Francis Scott Key out to make a deal for a mutual exchange. He went out on a rowboat to the ship and successfully negotiated the release of American prisoners, one for one, in exchange for the British prisoners of war. Jubilant in the successful negotiation, Key went down below to break the news to the men who were being held. And he found a cargo hull full of men, and he said, "Men, I got great news for you. Tonight you're free. Tonight you will be taken out of this filth. You'll be released from your chains, and you will be set free." You can't touch the mouse. Wow. He went back up and negotiated the passage back to shore. But the admiral came and said, "We have a little slight problem. We will still honor our commitment to release the men after tonight, but it'll only be academic. After tonight, it really won't matter." Key asked, "What do you mean?" The admiral said, "Mr. Key, tonight we laid an ultimatum on your colonies. Your people will either capitulate and lay down the colors of that flag that you think so much of, or you see that fort over there, Fort McHenry, we're going to remove it from the face of the earth." Well, Key asked, "How are you going to do that?" And the admiral said, "Scan the horizon of the sea, if you will. See all those dots? That's the entire British war fleet, and we have all the guns zeroed on that fort. It will be within striking distance of that fort in about 2.5 hours. and the war will be over, and these men would be free anyway. Key told him, "You cannot shell that fort. That fort is too big, and it's barely a military fort. It's full of men or women and children." The admiral said, "Don't worry about that. We left them a way out. Do you see that flag way up on the rampart? We told them if they lower that flag, the shelling will stop immediately, and when we know that they have surrendered, and you will now be under British rule." Francis Scott Key was a little put off by that, as you can imagine. As twilight began to fall, a haze settled over the ocean as it does at sunset, and suddenly the British war fleet unleashed. The sound was deafening, and there were many guns, and there was no relief. It was absolutely impossible to talk or hear, as the sky was dark, but it would suddenly be lit. All I could hear was the men down below saying, "Tell us where the flag is. What have they done with that flag? Is the flag still flying? Is it still on the rampart? Please tell us." 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours into the shelling, every time a bomb would explode, it would be close to the flag. They'd see the flag illuminated, the red glare of the bomb, and Francis Scott Key would report down to the men below, "It's still up." But I really hate this computer. I do apologize. The admiral said, "Your people are insane. What's the matter with them? Don't they understand that they're in an impossible situation?" Francis Scott Key had remembered what George Washington had once said: "What sets the American Christian apart from all people of the world is he will die on his feet before he lives on his knees." The admiral said, "We have instructed all guns to focus on the rampart to take that flag down. We don't understand something, though. Our reconnaissance has reported that the flag has been hit directly again and again and again and again, yet that flag is still flying. We don't understand. We will have every gun focus on that point, and we'll take it down." For the next 3 hours, Key said, the shelling was unmerciful. He said all I could hear was the men down below praying, "God, keep that flag where we last saw it." Sunrise came and the haze was still hanging over the land. The rampart was tall enough that he could see. There stood the flag. It was in shreds. The flagpole was kind of at a crazy angle, but the flag was still at top. Key went to shore and went into Fort McHenry and to see what had happened. What he found was that flagpole, which was about 90 foot in length, had suffered repetitious direct hits. The flag, about 40 feet by 24 feet, when it had fallen, fathers who knew what it meant for that flag not to be on the ground, and that all the war fleet guns were zeroed in, would walk over and hold it up humanly until they died. Their bodies were removed, and others would take their place. Key said that what held that flagpole in such a weird angle was the bodies of the Americans, the patriots. And that's when he penned a poem called "The Defense of Fort McHenry," which later became our national anthem. "Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that the flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave." Next time you hear that song sung, played, remember this story. The debt was demanded, the price was paid. And I still believe it's true today what George Washington once said: "What sets the American Christian apart from all other people in the world is that we will die on our feet before we'll live on our knees." Let's get back to the story of Haman. Sorry, I get a little emotional when I tell that story. Haman, being enraged over Mordecai's non-submission, he really didn't want to lay hands just on Mordecai alone, and he found out that Mordecai was a Jew and organized to kill every Jew in Persia. The king, not knowing that Esther was a Jew, approved of it. Mordecai found out and approached Esther with the plan of Haman and told her that she was the only one that could save them, since she was the king's wife. There was a rule in the palace that no one could come to see the king unless he called them. If they did come uninvited and the king outstretched his scepter to them, they'd be welcome. But if he did not, they'd be put to death. Esther, knowing this and knowing this law, agreed to bring the matter to the attention of the king, even though she was rarely invited to see him, and thus would possibly be put to death for approaching him uninvited. Esther told Mordecai to have every Jew fast for 3 days and 3 nights to seek God's aid, and that she would be killed for going in uninvited, and that every Jew's life would be spared if she was invited. Esther had some resolve, and she was not afraid. Matter of fact, she even said, "If I perish, I perish." Esther went in to the king, and he outstretched his scepter, which meant that he was welcome her. So she invited him and Haman to a banquet that she would have the following night. Well, as God does, he stirred the king that night, and the king couldn't sleep. So he does what everybody else does. He gets up and reads Chronicles when he can't sleep. And he read the Chronicles. Oh boy. Listen, if it doesn't bark or poop, I really don't know about it. So computers are not my thing. That's what I tell people all the time. They'll say, "Hey, how much can I take through?" I don't know. If it don't bark or poop, I couldn't tell you. But that night, the king was stirred, and he couldn't sleep. So he finds out that Mordecai was the one that saved his life. And he decided that he was going to award Mordecai because it had been overlooked. The next day, when Haman entered the court, the king asked Haman, "Hey, what should be done for someone who the king would like to honor?" And Haman, being full of himself, thought that it was going to be for him, so he gave the best. "Oh, it should be a royal robe that you have wore should be put on him, and a horse that you have ridden he should be placed on that, and he should be paraded around the palace square, by a prince." And the king agreed and told Haman, "Hey, what you said, I want you to do for Mordecai." Could you imagine Haman at that point? So Haman had to be, matter of fact, he said, "Hey, Haman, why don't you do that?" So Haman had to do what the king asked to be done. Jesus said in Matthew 23:12, you don't have to turn there, "And whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." And I wonder how many times throughout the ages Jesus saw that happen. Well, the following night, Esther revealed to the king that she indeed was a Jew, and that Haman had arranged to kill not only her family, but her people and the religion in Persia. The king, he was, like I said, he was kind of a grumpy guy, was furious, and Haman was hanged in the very gallows he had built to hang Mordecai. Just as the patriots, here we go again. Just as the patriots in the story of the Star Spangled Banner said, if they die, they die, but they will not allow that flag to touch the ground, knowing they'd be under British rule, so did Esther. Esther was loyal to her nation of Israel, and more importantly, to God. And if Haman was successful, her people would perish. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers them out of them all. Psalm 34:19, that's our camp theme. God raises up men and women to lead his people through trials. There's a Greek philosopher, and his name was Heraclitus. And he gave a speech one time, and I'll be paraphrasing. I will tell you the way it was told to me and the way we recited it in one of the units I was in. But out of every 100 men they send me, 80 are nothing but targets. The 20 are left, 10 shouldn't be there. 9 are real fighters, and we're lucky to have them, for they the battle make. But one, he is a warrior, and I must find him, for he the battle wins, and he will bring the others back. You know, a few years ago, without throwing too much shade to our former organization, there were men and women who stood up, faced all kind of adversity and all kind of shame, but remained courageous. They didn't wear capes, but they became that one warrior who would win the battle and bring us all back. And just as you're sitting here today because of the men and women who held that flag up, you sit here today because of those men and women who would not bow and submit to the non-assembly of God's people and God's Sabbaths and God's holy days. They followed the example of Jesus Christ, who washed his disciples' feet on the night he was betrayed. Then a few hours later turned over to Pilate, who in a leadership position and made a decision to wash his own hands, to be clean of the situation. You know, the story of Esther is not only a story of loyalty and preservation of God's people, but also a story of their loyalty to God. God chose Esther. He used Mordecai because of their courage. But there is the rest of the story. The king gave a decree to allow the Jews to protect themselves against those who hated them. And he said he wanted them to destroy, kill, and annihilate anybody who would come against them, and to plunder their possessions. On that day, when the decree came to pass, the Jews actually overcame all those that hated them and destroyed their enemies. Just as Esther was willing to give her life for her people, for no one could enter the presence of the king without being called, Christ gave his life for all of mankind. He did for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. He showed us that love that we should show to others. Again, you don't have to turn there, but John 15:13. Greater love has no one than this, than they would lay down their life for one's friends. I'm going to kind of close Christian living with another story. It's kind of a different hero that didn't wear a cape. I used to laugh at this story because the macho bravado in me would make me laugh. And now I can't laugh. I barely can get through it without shedding a tear. The summer of '99, a friend of mine had it's a while ago, so it's kind of hard to remember, but I believe it was a friend of mine had a heart attack, and that's why I used to work midnights. I get off at 7 in the morning, and we had to go back in, and usually that's what happens if someone has some sort of medical emergency or a cop gets shot or something like that. Everybody volunteers their time to just come in and work without worrying about being paid, because you got to take care of that person's family. So I don't know why, but that's what I remember, is that guy had the heart attack. So I come in, and as soon as I call on, I get a bolo. I'll be on the lookout for a car driven by a known man from our city. He had committed a violent armed carjacking in southern Indiana, him and another guy, and they thought they would be headed back to our city. And the woman that they had done this to was seriously injured, but she knew both suspects. A couple hours into it, into my shift, I hear an off-duty officer from another jurisdiction advise that he's behind the car, and they're stopped in traffic, and ahead of them was a wreck, and there was an officer up there directing traffic. So not wanting to interact with the officer, the guy flips a U-turn and takes off, and the guy that called it in, he's got his radio with him. He flips a U-turn and starts to follow. Well, the two guys realize that someone's following them, so they take off. And the guy had a decent car, but the pursuit happens, and the two suspects they trash the car into a parking lot of a supermarket and take off on foot. Well, I'm only a couple blocks away. When I hear all this, I start that way, of course. And I'm only a couple blocks away, and I'm driving down a side street, coming up to a main artery through our town, and I see two guys pop out from a couple houses, and there's another squad car from another jurisdiction coming straight at me. Well, I'm trying to get his attention and go, dude, behind you, they just came out and remember Heraclitus' speech, 20 shouldn't be there, or 10 shouldn't be there. He's one of those 10. In his mind, if he looked straight ahead, he didn't have to look at them and didn't have to interact with them, but he's actively out looking so he can check the box that he's trying to do whatever he can do to help the city. And he didn't even look at me. He just comes straight for me. Well, I had a slick top, which means I didn't have a bar across the top of my car, so no one knew I was a cop till you got right up on people, or I turned my lights on in the car. And I had a decision to make. Do I deploy my dog? They could run out into that active street, or not. Well, I decided not, of course, and I speed up and get around them while they take off running. So I get in front of them, kind of cut them off to shift them another way, hoping I could deploy my canine. Well, we didn't have door poppers back then. They were cheap. I worked for a cheap department, and I didn't have a door popper, so I had to get out, make sure my door was unlocked, and get him out, and just didn't have time. And I see him jump over a fence, and they're headed into an apartment complex. So knowing there was a study done in the early 90s called the instinctive flight syndrome, and it tells what people will do when they're in a fight or flight risk. When they're running from the police, they'll have certain behaviors, and one of those behaviors is, as soon as they get out of the sight of the police, they'll go to the ground and hide. So I knew I could probably at least get one of them. So I go about 2 blocks away. The wind typically comes from west to east. So I get my dog out and I go to search for him. Give you a little training tip: if you want your dog to do something for you, that's happy, like narcotics, you kind of got to act silly. You got to use high-pitched voices. It's all about pitches, inflections, and tones to get a dog to do what you want to do, and to get him to do the detection type work. Man, it's all fun. It's like playing with your kid. Everything's happy. If you're not having fun, they're not going to have fun. The other side is the patrol side. You want him to go into a fight, and I've said this before. You're asking, the little kid that loves Onward Christian Soldiers, in our context, you're asking him to go in and fight a guy that's 6'5" and weighs 300 pounds. That's what you're asking that dog to do. So you gotta kind of pump him up to let him know you're gonna be there in a fight with him, but let's go find him. And I was talking to someone the other day, and because we get our dogs from Holland, everything's usually in Dutch commands. Or if it's from Germany, it's in German commands, or Czechoslovakia, it's in Czech commands. So mine was Dutch. So revier is a command for him to go search for a person. So I'm pumping him up, and I'm like, yeah, buddy, let's go find him. Give him a slap on the side, and we go off. Well, it doesn't take long. His head comes up. We hit a fence. We climb this fence. Well, he climbs the fence, and he's got to wait for me. He's got a big anchor on the backside. So I get over this fence, and he starts going through these bushes, and it opens up, and there's that apartment complex. So I know I'm in the right area. And there's, 10, 12 cars sitting there. And he goes up, starts searching the cars, and I'm like, dude, I didn't use that voice. Man, we're going to find a man. Go find him. I take off walking down the cars, and he's searching. I'm like, no. I even correct him. I'm like, no, go find him. I get to the last car. No, find him. I take about 5 steps. He starts to pull me back. I correct him again. No, let's go find him. And I take another step. I'm about 6, 8 feet from the car now. He pulls me back, and I'm trying to catch my feet because he's 105 pounds. And if you want the equation of it, when they hit the guy in the suit, it's like Ray Lewis hitting the smallest quarterback. It's devastating. Well, this guy was like that, and he pulls me almost off my feet, and I'm stumbling, and I look, and there's a set of feet coming out from underneath a car. So I walk up the leash, and I yell, come out. I'm gonna send the dog, come out, come out, come out. And I see a pair of hands come out, and a guy comes out, and whatever you see on TV, I'm just telling you, in that situation, the dog wants paid. If I would do the fluffy, show dog thing, I would have laid him down, told him to stay, walk up, handcuff the guy. That doesn't happen. He's probably gonna bite this guy if I try that. So I call for backup. Backup arrives, that's a detective. Bigger guy. He has a hard time, so it takes a little bit, because once he goes down, he probably didn't get back up for a while. So he finally gets stood up, and I go, all right. Now other people start arriving. I said, he had a gun. He doesn't have a gun on him now. Where's the gun? Another detective looks under a car, no gun. All right, let's take him to City Hall. I'm going to find the other guy. There's two of them. So I go search for the other guy, and all of a sudden they say, hey, about an hour later, hey, you got to go back, and they found a gun. So I go back to pick up the gun, and the lady said, yeah, I pulled the car out. The gun was laying right there behind the tire. So I take the gun and I take it up to City Hall and give it to the detectives. I haven't written any report, I haven't told anybody the details of what happened, just that Casper had found them. So give it to the detectives, and a really good friend said, yeah, I need to talk to you, man. Let's go into my office. So we went and sat down, and he said, hey, when we found the gun, we started to press him a little more. And here's what the suspect said and told the detectives. I was pulling the trigger to shoot the cop in the back of the head. The last time when that dog pulled him to me. I knew I was going to get bit, so I gave up. My kids, they wouldn't be here today. There'd be a spot empty. If that would have happened. Ultimately, I know it was God, Jesus Christ, working through a dog that didn't wear a cape, to spare me that day, to bring me and my family where we are today. One of Mr. Fritz's favorite scriptures is one of my favorite. Isaiah 46:9 and 10 says, for I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things that are not yet done, saying my counsel will stand, and I will do all my pleasure. I didn't even know what the Church of God was in 1999, in that point in my life. But Christ, all he has done for me, all the afflictions, all the times that he's brought me to where I am today, absolutely my hero. He wore a robe, but not a cape. But that day, that guy, Casper, he's my hero. And he definitely didn't wear a cape. Have a great day.
For more information, go to our website at cogassembly.org. Copyright 2023, Church of God Assembly. All rights reserved.